Good morning on this terrific Tuesday. I hope everybody enjoyed your long weekend and had some great time with family and fellowship. We're here reading in 2 Samuel chapters 14 and 15. And so we just came off a period of time when David had bad things happen to him. He killed Goliath, got anointed to be the next king, and then out of no fault of his own, King Saul just wanted to kill him. He had to run, he had to set up residence in another city altogether, in another country altogether. And then Saul was killed, Jonathan was killed. He went through mourning, and he lived 7 years with a separated kingdom. So Israel had one king, which is the son of Saul, and then David was the king of Judah. And then all of a sudden, in our last few days' readings, then that king was killed and the kingdom was reunited and things was good. And the Bible said, and through our readings we read where God blessed David and he was successful in everything he did. He even had a period of rest. But you know, we have a tendency, or at least I do, maybe I should just put it that way. I have a tendency when I think about King David to remember what he's known for. He's known to be the man have had a heart after God. He's the man that God selected, not just to make him a king, but he selected his dynasty to be the lineage of Jesus Christ, to be born. And so I have a tendency to kind of put him up on a pedestal, and I've got this vision of him, and the mighty king. He was a great warrior. He killed more people than anybody's ever killed anybody, even with his own bare hands. And sometimes when I just think about David, I forget, though, the troubles he had when Saul was trying to kill him. And now that he's king, see, at least at that time, he wasn't king yet. He was just an ordinary man like the rest of us. You know, he was a shepherd. But now he's the king. He has it all. The kingdom is united. He's powerful. He's got all the money in the world. And then what happens? You know, trouble starts. He's not exempt from trouble. We're not exempt from trouble. And today's reading is a lot about that trouble. So May the 29th, 2018, Absalom had killed the man who raped his sister, and then he becomes separated from the king. There was definitely reasons for the separation, but this is what I love about today's story, is exactly what it says. It starts right off, 2 Samuel 14:1. Joab, the commander of his army, realized how much the king longed to see Absalom. See, Absalom had completely betrayed David. He was trying to take the kingdom over from him, for crying out loud. He had committed murder. He had gone against his father's wishes. But the king never stopped longing to see him. I'm a mom. I know what it feels like to have your kids angry with you, or to have your kids separated from you. I know what that feels like. I know how that hurts. He's a father. This shows us his heart as a father. And so Joab sets out and sends a woman to masquerade, and he actually manipulates the situation to get David to think about things in another manner. So he concocts a story for this woman to say about her family, because Joab knew David's heart. He knew that he was a fair man, that he was a just man. So when this woman comes saying that things haven't been right in her family, David just billows out, well, we'll make that right. And then she turns and tells him, then why aren't you living this way for yourself? And then David knew. I mean, it opened his eyes. But my point with it is that things hurt David just like things hurt you. Things weren't right in David's life, just like things may not be right in my life. It wasn't just a bed of roses for him to be the king, and yet he continued to be a man after God's own heart. So, it's a powerful story. And then it goes on, and one of the things that stuck out for me on May the 29th in this reading is how Absalom came let's see, it was in verse 33. So Joab told the king what Absalom had said. Then at last David summoned Absalom, who came and bowed low before the king, and the king kissed him. So there was a kiss, and Absalom's intentions was nothing but evil. He had no intention of being reconciled with his dad, and I'm not even sure that David even responded the way he should, because he still stayed pretty separate from Absalom, and then it ends poorly. I mean, this conspiracy that Absalom had gained momentum, it says in verse 12. It's in verse 16, so the king and all his household set out at once. He left no one behind. So here we are again. He's having to leave everything he has behind. He's having to go into exile because his own son has a conspiracy to kill him and to take over the kingdom. It wasn't just a bed of roses all the time for David, by any stretch of the imagination. And I find comfort in that a man with the reputation and the legacy that David has, and the struggles he had, and then the temptations he had, and even the failures he had, and yet God recognizes him and describes him as the man after his own heart. That's very comforting to me. So then we move to John 18. This is where Judas comes, and once again, and again it's in the same reading. Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss, identifies him so that he's arrested. When you're reading in the book of John, this particular gospel, John's account of the events that took place varies a little bit from the others, and I find that interesting, but we're getting it from different perspective. So what John sees is important, and how John describes truth, because it is truth, is from his paradigm, his mapping in his brain, and the way he saw it all, versus the way Matthew, Mark, and John saw it. Matthew, Mark, and Luke saw it. And that's interesting. But I wanted to see if there was a couple of things. Yeah, John makes a big point about Peter drawing the sword and slashing off the right ear of the high priest's slave. But Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Shall I not drink from the cup of suffering the Father has given me?" Jesus knew. But also, the point with this is that Peter loved Jesus. At this point in time, Peter absolutely knew when he drew that sword, when those soldiers were there to arrest Jesus, that he might die. That he was willing to lay his life down for Jesus. In that moment when he slashed off the ear, that's how much he loved him, and yet he still denied him 3 times. Why is that important? Because I've denied Christ in my life. Because I may deny him again. You know what? When I wake up and I'm fearful and I start looking at the checkbook and seeing, oh man, how am I going to pay the bills? I'm denying Christ. Because Christ died to give me provision for everything I'm called to do. And I have to walk by faith. And what is faith? Faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the substance of things not seen. The checkbook may not show I've got all I need for this calling, but by faith, I believe it's there. And so by having fear, when I allow fear to step in, oh, I better not do that because they may reject me, I'm denying Christ, just as Peter denied Christ. So you see how we tie it into our life today? When I'm denying Christ is when I'm walking in fear. When I'm speaking death from words I'm speaking instead of speaking life. Which reminds me of a conversation I was having right before this video started. I'm going to have to rethink that. Was I speaking death or was I speaking life? Did I deny Christ or did I not? But anyway, he denies him 3 times, and that's what's in our reading today. And then I highlighted this part in verse 22 just because, again, it pierced me. Then one of the temple guards standing nearby slapped Jesus across the face. Boy, it's so easy for us over 2,000 years later to not get the full impact of what he suffered for you and for me. He could have called 10,000 angels. In that moment, when that guard standing nearby slapped Jesus across the face, he could have called 10,000 angels and took care of that guard. But he loved us so much that he endured. He endured those jaunts and those jeers, those slaps, the spit, the beatings. God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son. I'm so grateful, Father. So grateful. Anytime you get to read Psalms 119, it's a powerful, powerful Psalms. I recommend that you really take your time and read it. But I want to end with a Proverbs that I'm oftentimes quoting. I paraphrase it. My paraphrase, I'll share it with you after I read how it really states. So in the New Living Translation today, the proverb says, better to have little with godliness than to be rich and dishonest. And now here's the part that I often paraphrase. New Living Translation says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. I often interpret that as saying, man plans and God laughs. We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. You know, and that's not to say that we're a puppet on a string. We're not. He gives us free choice. But just again, as we were talking today, filming these videos, when we submit and we're really his, I'm yours, then he is directing our steps. And while he wants us to plan, we're good stewards when we put plans in place. When those plans get altered and we don't get to sleep where we think we're supposed to sleep, we trust God that he's directing our path. I just pray that I release and let him direct my path on this terrific Tuesday. Thanks for joining us.